You're watching Outsiders with the rebellious Rita Panahi, the mutinous James Morrow, and myself, the defiant Rowan Dean. Lots more coming up on the show, including Dr. Harvey Risch, the world expert epidemiologist, who will tackle head-on what this dolt said in Parliament last week.
That the member for Hughes and the member for Dawson continue to claim that hydroxychloroquine should be used against COVID-19. B, that these claims are contradicted by the Therapeutic Goods Administration and the Chief Medical Officer, who said in a press conference on the 31st of August 2020 that the medical advice is that it is not useful as a medicine for COVID-19.
Maybe, Chris, but in the last few weeks, which I'm sure you've missed, we've had several more studies, all showing hydroxychloroquine to be effective, including one from Ghent University in Belgium, which showed in a study of over 8,000 patients, hydroxychloroquine reduced mortality in those diagnosed 5 days before and 5 days after symptom onset. We had another from Andorra. We also got the Italian Chorist study of 3,000 patients reported in the European Journal of Internal Medicine, which, and again I quote, shows that hydroxychloroquine use was associated with a 30% reduction in overall in-hospital mortality. And we've seen studies reinforcing Sydney-based Dr. Thomas Barodi's claims that ivermectin is also effective in combination, like hydroxychloroquine, with zinc, as was revealed by him on this show. But of course, our politicians and their bureaucrats know so much better, don't you? Anyway, speaking of whom, I was absolutely gobsmacked this week when the New South Wales Premier Gladys Berejiklian told an online conference that if her government could reach net zero carbon emissions by 2050, it would be the stuff of dreams. To have a Conservative Tory government legislate 2050 emissions is the stuff of dreams in Australia. We can only hope to emulate it, Ms Berejiklian said on Wednesday night. No, Gladys, it would not be the stuff of dreams, it would be the stuff of nightmares. The stuff of nightmares for every hard-working family, mum, dad, gran and the kids. A nightmare for every small business and for every person who just wants a job, and an absolute nightmare for every freedom-loving Australian. Gladys Berejiklian, for you to have made that comment on the very day that a young pregnant woman was handcuffed by police for upholding her right to free speech, her right to live her own life, her right to enjoy her family, underlines just how clueless well-meaning people like you, Gladys, really are, and just how dangerous fanatical climate cultists like your colleague Matt Keane really are. Over the past 8 months, every Australian has learned just what a nightmare government-mandated zero emissions would look like, thanks to the arrogant, deceitful and scandalously incompetent government responses to COVID-19. But hang on, you say. What on earth has climate change got to do with COVID-19? Well, everything. But don't take my word for it. Just listen to the World Health Organization Director General, Dr. Tedros, who links COVID to climate change, and he did so only 2 weeks ago. And I quote from his speech, "We will not, we cannot go back to the way things were. The pandemic has given new impetus to the need to accelerate efforts to respond to climate change." And he went on, "Throughout history, outbreaks and pandemics have changed economies and societies. This one will be no different." Then he said that the pandemic has given us a glimpse of our world as it could be. Cleaner skies and rivers. As the IPA noted this week, Tedros' remarks give the public the first hint that the political class want to turn the tools of the pandemic, that is, the border closures, the lockdowns, the state of emergency powers, the restrictions, the curfews, closing down businesses, turn them all to climate change. Indeed, Tedros got very specific, saying that the World Health Organization has just published a manifesto for a healthy and green recovery from the virus, with 6 policy prescriptions, including protecting nature, investing in water. That's all that dodgy Murray-Darling water buyout stuff. Not quite sure what that has to do with sneezing and coughing, but anyway. transitioning to renewable energy and stopping subsidies on fossil fuels. That's right, the solution to the pandemic, according to the Marxist head of the World Health Organization, the body that all Australian governments are slavishly listening to, the solution to recovering from the coronavirus is to stop using fossil fuels. His words, not mine. Yep, those same geniuses, remember, who when the virus was raging through Wuhan told us all that there was no evidence of human-to-human transmission at all. They're now telling us that the way to recover from the coronavirus is to reach net zero carbon emissions. You see, Gladys, your stuff of dreams is also conveniently the Dream, one of the most discredited, inept organisations on the planet, run by an avowed anti-capitalist, anti-West, China-loving Marxist, also dreams. Hope you sleep well at night, Gladys. But the nightmare gets even worse. Tedros then said, in July, we added actionables for each of these policy prescriptions, providing 81 concrete steps for policymakers to build a healthier, fairer, greener world in order to recover from COVID-19. Actionables. Well, we've seen what actionables look like during the coronavirus pandemic, haven't we? Actionables means panic buying as our shops and businesses are closed down and shelves are emptied. Actionables means being locked in your home with an 8 p.m. curfew. Actionables means rule at the whim of so-called experts who shut down schools and ban you from playing golf simply to send you a message. Actionables means not being able to go outside a 5-kilometre radius from your own home without being fined thousands of dollars by the police. Actionables means closing all our borders and banning international travel. Actionables means the police smashing down your front door for comments you wrote on Facebook. And actionables means handcuffing pregnant women in their pyjamas for daring to say, hang on, this isn't right. You don't have to be some crazy right-wing nutjob climate change, guilty my lord, to recognise that the reactions from our federal and state governments to COVID-19 are, if not a blueprint, then certainly a timely warning to the rest of us of just how dangerous excessive government powers and control by unelected bureaucrats quickly become when power is absolute. Think of all of the mistakes, the diktats, the disruptions, the restrictions and the stuff-ups that we've seen just in the last 8 months simply because the bureaucrats, the experts, and the politicians became so determined to get the invisible virus down to zero transmissions. And now, ask yourself, what punishing, job-destroying, freedom-stealing measures will they dream up to enforce upon all Australians Gladys's fantasy dream of zero emissions of the equally invisible carbon dioxide gas? Imagine Dan Andrews, Anthony Albanese, Chris Bowen, Anastasia Palaszczuk, or any of their equivalents in future years with the power to obsessively restrict carbon emissions in all our lives. Imagine the bungling, like with the Ruby Princess or the hotel quarantines, or the lying, or the disgusting double standards, like we saw with Black Lives Matter being allowed to march, or with borders being closed down, but some people can go to the footy, but others aren't allowed to even get hospital treatment. And imagine the endless, ludicrous parading of meaningless statistics every single day. Don't forget, just this week, the American Centre for Disease Control admitted that 94% of the recorded coronaviruses are false. 94%. But hey, it's just numbers, and numbers can be made to sound scary. Indeed, already, climate alarmists are trying to categorise the number of climate-related deaths. How long before we're receiving hourly updates on our iPhones with some idiotic Labor Premier or Prime Minister standing there at daily news conferences with their equally fanatical Chief Climate Officer telling us all about a dangerous spike in the climate death toll and, a cluster of new climate deaths means we now have to move to stage 4 carbon restrictions? Already the left and the UN, the same mob behind Tedros and the World Health Organization, they've been pushing the idea of criminalising any form of climate scepticism, even jailing so-called climate deniers. Yes, we saw this week, Gladys, precisely what your dream of government-mandated zero emissions really looks like, a dystopian nightmare. I just hope that I'm not in my pyjamas when they come for me.